forever. All around me, yeah. Despite what you see, just know there's more beyond the horizon. Love is not confining, but it's freedom in possibility. What holds more weight in this world than a substance of love? A substance of love and sincerity. I can forever expound upon a love that has no boundaries. into your eyes. We float out of this world. The floor is of the sky. Our love is of the stars that stretch far and wide. And as far as eyes can see, belongs to you and me. It's our territory to explore, just to find more. A brand new house of love. You're safe and warm inside. Tonight,
Thank you for joining us this evening for Connecting Philanthropy and Community, Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy's signature event. I'm your mistress of ceremonies, Evelyn Holmes. Each year, the event highlights the exemplary work of leaders fostering meaningful connections between the local philanthropic sector and the diverse communities it serves. We are proud to recognize leaders in the local philanthropic and nonprofit sectors who have demonstrated a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion on behalf of African American communities. Now, the goal is to stimulate dialogue and action around strengthening philanthropy's commitment to the African American community by paying tribute to today's leaders and by way of recognition and support for the leaders of tomorrow. The awards and keynote speaker call special attention to philanthropy community partnerships that identify needs and create strategic opportunities aimed at improving outcomes for African Americans. Tonight, we will recognize leaders in the local philanthropic and nonprofit sectors whose work exemplifies a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Black community, and are honored to have as our keynote speaker, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter and creator of the landmark 1619 Project. Thank you to the foundations, corporations, and businesses that continue to support the work of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. Your support provides us with opportunities to promote dialogue between philanthropic and nonprofit organizations, advance our collective understanding of pressing issues for the African American community, and advance racial equity. Thank you to tonight's sponsors: the Grand Victoria Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, Boeing, the Chicago Foundation for Women, Chicago Beyond, the Field Foundation of Illinois, the McCormick Foundation, Forefront, the Spencer Foundation, the Polk Brothers Foundation, Thrive Chicago, GCM Grosvenor, Association of Black Foundation Executives.
Good evening. This is Governor J.B. Pritzker. I'd like to welcome you all to Connecting Philanthropy and Community. We're coming together to recognize leaders in the local philanthropic and nonprofit sectors whose work exemplifies a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Black community. I'm deeply proud to lead a state so committed to lifting up the people we serve. And it's your tremendous leadership that is making a real impact in our communities. I want to congratulate this evening's honorees whose exemplary work continues to cultivate meaningful connections between the local philanthropic sector and our diverse communities. I also want to extend a warm welcome to keynote speaker and Pulitzer Prize winning reporter Nikole Hannah-Jones. I applaud Nikole for developing the landmark 1619 Project, which aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans as part of the very center of our national narrative. Nikole's voice has forced us all to hold honest conversations about past wrongs created by a history of systemic racism and to address how we can move forward together. I encourage you all to continue to promote dialogue between philanthropic and nonprofit organizations, to advocate for equitable philanthropy in communities of color, and to foster alliances to best serve all of our communities. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Toni Preckwinkle, President of the Cook County Board of Commissioners. I'm pleased to join you for the Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy's annual event, Connecting Philanthropy and Community 2021. I'm sorry that we can't meet together in person this time, but I look forward to the next time we can come together to celebrate soon. I look forward to hearing our keynote address from Nikole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter and creator of the 1619 Project. I'd also like to congratulate this year's awardees. Corliss Garner, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at First Midwest Bank, is the 2021 Champion of Diversity. Jonathan Peck, Master Facilitator, Organizer, Trainer, and Coach at Civic Lab, is the 2021 Champion of Social Justice. Congratulations to our awardees, and thank you for your good work. It's fitting that this celebration falls during Black History Month, our annual time for reflection on the achievements of African Americans in our society and a celebration of Black history and culture. Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy is an organization that's deeply committed to equity and advocacy for the Black community and building important bridges between philanthropic and nonprofit organizations. I'm grateful to have them as a partner in our ongoing racial equity work and look forward to working together. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Mayor Lightfoot here to welcome you to Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy, or CAAIP's signature event, Connecting Philanthropy and Community, Facing Adversity in Leadership. Today, we will recognize some of Chicago's philanthropic and nonprofit leaders who are committed to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Black community. I want to congratulate tonight's honorees for their phenomenal work, which fosters meaningful connections between philanthropic organizations and the unique communities they serve. I also want to welcome tonight's keynote speaker and Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, Nikole Hannah-Jones, back to our great city, and commend her for her incredible 1619 project, which reframes this country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. Thanks to projects like these and CAAIP's ongoing efforts to promote equitable and inclusive philanthropy, I am confident that we can push our city and our country to become a better, more welcoming, and supportive place for all. Thank you, and please continue to be safe.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Jessica Dudley, Director of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy, and it is my deep pleasure to welcome you to tonight's celebration of Black leadership and Black history. A special thank you to all of our sponsors who have supported this event and who have continued to support the work of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. We are so appreciative of your support of our work to advance racial equity. I'd also like to thank all of our participants in tonight's event, our civic leaders, our local leaders, and a very special thank you to Claudette Baker, who chaired tonight's event. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Nikole Hannah-Jones for joining us tonight for this conversation. We so look forward to hearing her remarks on leading through adversity. Enjoy the event.
Good evening. On behalf of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy, Connecting Philanthropy and Community Planning Committee, welcome. I'm Claudette Baker, the event chair. We are more than excited and pleased that you are with us as we present lessons in leadership from CAAIP members, community members, and our stimulating conversation with Pulitzer Prize commentary winner Nikole Hannah-Jones. Our theme, Leading Through Adversity, is an opportunity and a challenge for you to reflect, to define and redefine how to lead, when to press, when to stand, where to lead, and to elevate your voice and invest resources to eradicate injustices and racial inequities. And while you're leading, Please support, nurture, and share space with new and rising leaders. How fitting it is that we hold the event tonight on February 26, when in 1926, Carter G. Woodson started Negro History Week, and now we have Black History Month. Carter G. Woodson, a leader. And how fitting it is that in 1869, we have a Sankofa moment tonight, that the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote for Black people was sent to states for ratification. Now let that sink in for a moment and consider the juxtaposition fresh in our memory. A recent election was held. White supremacists did not like the outcome and sought to delegitimize votes cast by us, Black people, millions of Black people in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And how fitting it is that tonight, fast forward in 2021, history is in the making at CAAIP's Connecting Philanthropy and Community event. We celebrate and honor our two champions, Corliss Garner and Jonathan Pegg, leaders. So thank you all, and thank you to our foundation and corporate partners for your support for tonight's event and CAAIP's year-long activities and programs. And thank you, Tina Battle, Iona Calhoun-Baptiste, Deborah Clark, Jessica Dudley, Janice Dunbar-Travis, Caroline McCoy, and Tawa Mitchell. You are the best committee ever. And to all of our leaders watching right now, thank you for leading through adversity. Possess this moment and have a wonderful evening.
I feel really privileged just to be able to help young students access high-quality arts. I think I was probably 10 when I went to a solo show at the Brooklyn Museum with my family, and that has just stayed with me, and it just showed me how seeing artists of color in a public setting is really crucial at a young age. So now that I have this privilege to help fund arts programs that can reach students of all ages and races, yeah, that's just something that really grounds me, and I'm grateful to do that. So Sabrina joined the Fry Foundation and immediately reached out to us, which was great. And we asked her to join our leadership team because she had such a clear perspective on how we could be supporting folks that were new to the philanthropy space.
When I first started working at MacArthur Foundation, there weren't very many Blacks that I knew of that were in philanthropy. And through CAAIP, as the numbers have increased, CAAIP's membership has increased.
I think being a Black woman and a Black funder in the arts learning sector means that I get to offer some of my background and some of my knowledge base around art and what it means to actually give students access to art.
There's so much knowledge that the CAAIP membership has. You have networking meetings and people are sharing their story about how they got to where they are and what their dreams are and what they want to do next. And then you have people that may help to be there to be your mentor, to help you get to that next step. I've seen that happen a lot. And so I just love the work. And I love helping my Black community. So I just love it. I can't see working in philanthropy and not being a part of CAAIP.
I believe the talent of CAAIP, the leadership of CAAIP, the leadership of the foundations here could be an example of what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like at a philanthropic level.
We're launching some work around racial equity and dismantling white supremacy, really thinking about how we grow leaders who understand the social constructs of race and think differently about them in their work. And I think that'll have huge impacts on both individual leadership, but organizations that ground themselves in understanding racial equity and are not just aiming towards racial equity outcomes, but are really driven by racial equity in their work.
What I would like to see in the future of CAAIP is to grow beyond Chicago and this region, to really become a larger player in the national philanthropic scene.
Having folks of different races and ages in these rooms where really big choices are made can sort of have this lasting change, right? If we have program officers who are of different races and cultures, and we can also help children of different races and culture. If you are in the Chicago area and you're really committed to racial equity, this is a way for you to live out those principles by supporting CAAIP. So there's a network of folks, deeply talented, rich network of folks who know how to do this work, and supporting CAAIP means that that work moves forward. I think for folks who are looking to learn about philanthropy and become engaged in the space, it's also a home for that. We have folks that are 6 months new in philanthropy, and we have folks who have been in the sector for 20 or 30 years, and so you also have just a rich knowledge and history of the sector that lives in the organization, and it's an opportunity to tap into and support that network.
One example that came to mind was with just this past year. I think everybody across the world had a little bit of an upheaval, right? We saw the convergence of at least 4 different crises: health, housing, labor, and racism. And so through the Obama CBA Coalition, we were able to really bring awareness to these converging crises in a way that really opened the door for the passage of the Woodlawn Housing and Preservation Ordinance, which basically protects low-income and working Black families from being displaced from their homes as a result of real estate speculation coming into the Woodlawn community and the surrounding communities as a result of the construction of the Obama Presidential Center. And so for me, really learning from that experience was just a testament to the power of organizing, community organizing, and what happens when we reclaim and assert our individual power collectively. The idea of collective power is something that I believe I'm bringing into this new role for myself as the executive director for the We Vote Foundation, to make sure that our communities continue to get the resources that's needed so that we don't see another convergence like this leading to disproportionate deaths of Black mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers.
Introducing Corliss Garner, our champion of diversity. She leads the way. Corliss V. Garner leads the way as a results-driven, strategic leader with extensive expertise in deepening and developing sustainable relationships with various stakeholders. Ms. Garner accredits her leadership style and inspiration to her late mother, Ms. Murray Garner. Corliss cherished her mom's life endurance of raising a family on the west side of Chicago. It is her mother's experience that shaped Corliss both professionally and personally. Ms. Garner is grounded and clear about her leadership in diversity and corporate social responsibility. This was framed by her early education at an all-black school and in attending Lane Tech College Prep High School. Lane Tech was Ms. Garner's first step out of her West Side hood. It introduced her to a microcosm of differences and representation that exists in the world. Ms. Garner leads the way in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Currently, she is the Senior Vice President, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility, referred to as CSR, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, referred to as DEI at First Midwest Bank. She successfully designed and executed the inaugural CSR and DEI strategy for the Regional 2300 Personal Financial Service Firm. She has also led the way with her former employer, BMO Harris Bank, where she envisioned and launched the first national diverse markets outreach strategy for corporate giving. Ms. Garner leads the way in the community as the recipient of numerous awards for leadership and serves on multiple boards and committees for nonprofits. She is an accomplished speaker and presenter and passionately volunteers for education and career development causes for young people. Her proudest accomplishment, however, which directly aligns with CAAIP's mission, is her leadership as the board chair of the African American Legacy Fund at the Chicago Community Trust. Serving in this capacity for 3 years, Ms. Garner has elevated philanthropy by emphasizing the connection to the community. Under her leadership, the African American Legacy Fund strategically redefined its grant-making criteria as being Black-led, with more than 51% being staff, leadership, and board, and Black serving, with more than 51% being clients served. On a personal level, Ms. Garner believes giving has to be meaningful to the individual, and everyone has something to give to build community beyond money. Ms. Garner leads the way in balancing her personal and professional time. Here's something you probably didn't know. She's a certified bartender and was once terminated from her position because she took in a counterfeit bill. But that didn't stop her. She just said, oh well, and now she is a jet setter. She's traveled all over the world to places like Bangkok, Thailand, Lisbon, Portugal, Paris, France, London, England, and Sydney, Australia, to name a few places. And when she's not traveling, this introvert still practices her bartending craft, but now it's just with family and friends. No matter where she is, Corliss Garner leads her team to drive successful outcomes aligned with the business goals and objectives. The Corliss Garner difference in leadership is helping others understand the role they can play, open their mind to the community, and to encourage all to work together towards making an impact right where they are. Corliss says her most valuable leadership lesson learned is to use her voice uniquely. Ms. Garner leads the way in speaking out and stepping out of her comfort zone. She finds the bravery to do, to create change, and to transform community. Corliss Garner leads the way as CAAIP's 2021 Champion of Diversity.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the leaders of CAAIP and specifically to my friend, Andreessen Brown, for nominating me for the Champion of Diversity Award. I'm truly humbled and extremely grateful for this honor. It means the world to me to be recognized by so many incredible leaders and friends in the sector. To be in the company of past honorees such as Deborah Bennett, Heather Parrish, and Consuela Brown makes this award even more special. In thinking about my comments this evening, I took some time to reflect on the theme of this year's event, leading through adversity. How does one lead through adversity? I go back to Sunday evening, May 31st, 2020. I was sitting on my couch watching the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. My spirit was fraught with so many emotions. I was just about 9 months into my new role as head of corporate responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion at First Midwest Bank, being charged with building the blueprint for this work. 3 months prior, coronavirus had shut down life as we knew it and had taken so many lives with it. Amy Cooper was a hashtag. Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery were hashtags. The already disturbing rhetoric from the White House was getting even more disturbing. We were firmly into a hotbed election season. So can you say adversity? As I watched the news, every channel was consumed with what literally felt like the world being on fire. I live on the west side of the city, close to the United Center, and I could hear the police and fire sirens to the east of me and to the west of me. And as the clock approached midnight, I sat there and I thought, how am I supposed to go to work tomorrow? The answer was I couldn't. I couldn't walk into a Zoom room or a Teams meeting and just pick up where we left off the previous Friday. It wasn't business as usual for me. So I started writing an email to my manager and my peers, and I entitled that email, Thinking, and Thinking About You Too. The purpose of the email was twofold. First, I wanted to share how I was feeling as a Black woman in America in that moment, and also to check in with the team and ask how they were processing it all. How were they feeling? I also knew this email would be a small step to breaking the pervasive silence about such topics in corporate America. So I go back to the question, how does one lead through adversity? There's no right or wrong answer, nor is there a formula to follow. As I look back on 2020, I can call out 4 things that were key for me. First, I leaned into my authenticity. I wasn't sure what reaction I would receive from the email I sent my team, but it was important for me to share how I was feeling in that moment with the people that I work with every day to advance equity and inclusion at our company and in our communities. That moment jump-started a conversation that continues in our company to this day. Flexibility was key as well. I started 2020 with these amazingly well thought out plans, and I got to about 40% of them. While COVID-19 and racial tensions shifted everything for the strategy I was building, in many ways, it accelerated the urgency for this work and forced those who weren't paying attention before to begin doing so now. Thirdly, no matter what was thrown my way, I was always crystal clear about my responsibility to this work and the ultimate mission, to be a catalyst for change. And finally, when it gets hard, and it will get hard, I seek inspiration. For me, that's remembering my mother's spirit. She was born into adversity in Jim Crow, Mississippi, and life wasn't easy at all for her. However, she always found just the right amount of bravery in the midst of adversity to be a catalyst for change. So once again, I thank you all so much for this honor and continue to enjoy the show.
The Champion of Social Justice highlights a special commitment to racial ethnic equity and improved outcomes for the African American community by a nonprofit professional. This year, we are honored to recognize Jonathan Peck, CEO and President at Civic Lab Chicago. Jonathan is well known for his strategic advice in the areas of organizational development, electoral political campaigns, strategic planning and partnerships, and nonprofit executive leadership and business management. With extensive experience both locally and internationally, Jonathan has worked to advance social justice in over 15 countries across North and Latin America, Europe, and Southern Africa. Jonathan Peck is a tireless advocate for Black youth and families, working to design and deliver many social justice campaigns. This includes the campaign to shut down the Audi home for youth and sowing the seeds for restorative justice work inside schools and nonprofits. He has supported the positive development of young people across the city of Chicago by leading community-based programs, grassroots organizations, service-providing agencies, residential facilities, and advocacy groups. Throughout his career, Jonathan has remained a student of revolution. He is also a practitioner of the cycle of liberation and the ladder of engagement. He is a resilient, effective, and inspirational champion of Black and brown youth.
Thank you, Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. My deep gratitude and blessing to CAAIP's senior leadership team, staff, and core volunteers for your sustained efforts at building and maintaining the critical infrastructure for equitable leadership. CAAIP continues to be a thoughtful, caring, and strategic partner for all of us to make and keep the key connections and relations needed to take on our most challenging issues, and at the end of the day, it is these very connections and relations that we rely on to continue to light the path for our peoples to walk on. I am so grateful to be able to do the work and recognize how that in of itself is a distinct honor and privilege, particularly during this multi-pandemic situation we are in. I also want to honor and elevate all of my relations that I have that are in essence the main reasons that I still have the ability to be a champion of social justice. My social justice work happens all the time, first and foremost as a loving and caring father and husband to my beautiful, amazing children, Jonathan and Wesley, and to my social justice champion and top warrior, my wife and partner, Zelda Harris. I am who I am through other people, or in the greatest spirit of Ubuntu, I am because you are. I have been blessed throughout all my life, from my humble beginnings as a Black Vietnamese war orphan to my upbringing and childhood growing up in Williamstown, Massachusetts, to all the many opportunities afforded me to travel and be trained and coached up in local, national, and global African and Latin American liberation struggles. All of this opportunity and experience has led me to planting my roots in South Side of Chicago and spending a lifetime of being the servant leader to so many amazing and beautiful children, youth, and families across our great city. I am a social justice champion because of all those people and communities that helped me become who I am today. I elevate my mothers and fathers and siblings and so many comrades who have fed and nurtured me throughout my life and who continue to do so. Being a social justice champion is all about how I live in right relationship with everyone and everything around me. It means that the very change that I am fighting for, I must do the hard work to be that change every day as a father, husband, confidant, and warrior. I know that we face many what can seem immovable objects in our way towards a more equitable and just world. The reality of the situation does not go unnoticed. Living and co-caring for and co-raising up our family and our beautiful and sharp Black children in the South Side of Chicago is, to put it bluntly, the most challenging thing that I've ever faced in my decades of living in social justice practice. We are in the eye of the storm, and I know that it requires such a level of passion and attention that at times is exhausting, but all the time is so fulfilling and purposeful. So what I offer is the opportunity to be who I am because you are. The notion that our shared humanity is permanently interwoven, and we can lead together with our collective shared spirit of Ubuntu in these challenging times and be in right relationship with each other and with the environment that we are in. I know that we can do everything imaginable to expand our circles of civic love and continue to embrace each other and others across our civic landscape. As social justice champions all, we have everything we need to solve our most salient issues. What is required as social justice champions all is that we must practice, build, and lift up our civic Ubuntu, our knowledge, skills, and attributes of what it means to be fully engaged in our civic body of politics in our professional, personal, and community lives. I am truly blessed and grateful to be recognized in this moment. It is an honor as the President and CEO of the Civic Lab to be affirmed as the 2021 Champion of Social Justice. To this end, I invite you all to the Civics Lab's third Harambee, Nation Building, which we will do online Saturday, April 10th, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Time. To join us, click over to www.tinyurl.com/cl-Harambee. I thank you all, and I do hope that you are well and in good spirits in your refuge. Please enjoy the show.
Nikole Hannah-Jones is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and creator of the landmark 1619 Project. The New York Times 1619 Project commemorates the 400th anniversary of the beginning of slavery in what would become the United States by examining slavery's modern legacy and reframing the way we understand this history and the contributions of Black Americans to the nation. Nikole's lead essay, Our Democracy's Founding Ideals Were False When They Were Written, Black Americans Have Fought to Make Them True, was awarded the 2020 Pulitzer Prize. Nikole also has written extensively about school resegregation across the country and chronicled the decades-long failure of the federal government to enforce the landmark 1968 Fair Housing Act. In 2016, Nikole Hannah-Jones co-founded the I.D.B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting, a training and mentoring organization dedicated to increasing the ranks of investigative reporters of color. Casey Attiuro manages communication strategy, content development, and public engagement for the Joyce Foundation. Prior to joining the foundation in 2018, she served as Director of External Affairs for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, where she led communications and community engagement. She has also led communications for U.S. Congresswoman Robin Kelly, the Illinois Governor's Office, and the Illinois State Treasurer's Office. A former journalist herself, Casey was a staff writer in a number of national newspapers, including the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Connecting Philanthropy and Community Keynote Conversation. I'm Casey Attiuro, Managing Director of the Joyce Foundation, and I have the pleasure of leading today's conversation with our special guest and my fabulous friend, Nikole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning writer with the New York Times Magazine and the creative force behind the 1619 Project. Hey, Nikole.
Hey, Casey. So good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for doing this. Nikole and I go way back, almost 20 years, to our early days as young journalists in a tiny newsroom in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I've watched with pride as her career has evolved over the years, and that evolution is why I asked her here today, to share the story behind the story that she is now famous for. Long before the 1619 Project, Nikole was fiercely focused on telling our stories, the battles she fought before and those she fights today in defense of her work hold important lessons in leading through adversity. So we're going to talk a little bit about the project, but today's conversation is really about the road that led her to creating her seminal work and the road ahead. And I'll be asking some questions of my own with some audience submissions mixed in. Okay, Nikole, so first up, many of the folks watching are familiar with and fans of the 1619 Project, but for those who are just entering the chat, what is the 1619 Project?
Thank you. So the 1619 Project is a work of journalism that came out in August of 2019. It is a special issue of the New York Times Magazine, a special section of the New York Times paper, as well as a podcast. And what the project is August of 2019 marked the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans being sold into the colony of Virginia. And so it's a project that really excavates the legacy of that moment and argues that virtually no aspect of modern American life has been left untouched by the institution of slavery, even as we've treated that slavery as an asterisk to the American story, that it is in fact foundational and that we're still grappling with that legacy. So through a series of essays, looking at various modern American institutions, we make that argument.
And this project was totally your brainchild. So can you talk about sort of like what made you want to do this, the process in creating it?
Sure. So I've been thinking about the year 1619 since I was a high school student. And that's when I came across the date 1619 in a book called Before the Mayflower. My high school offered a one semester Black Studies elective course. And that course was really transformative for me as a kid. In that 3 months, I got more information on Black history, Black contributions than I had received my entire K-12 education. And so I kept asking that teacher, Mr. Ray Dow, to give me a book to read. And I would devour those books. And one of the books he gave me was Before the Mayflower. And the reason it's called Before the Mayflower is because every American child learns about that ship in 1620. But there was another ship that arrived a year earlier in 1619 called the White Lion. And no American child was really taught about that ship, even though it is just as important to the American story. So I've been thinking about that date and the power of erasure and who decides what parts of American history we learn and understand and who decides which parts we erase for, a long time. And I've also often joked that my work was trying to explain the country from 1619. And because you've known me a long time, I have talked about the year 1619 for a very long time. Forever. So as the anniversary was approaching, it's late 2018, I just kept thinking that this monumental 400-year anniversary was approaching, and yet most Americans had never even heard of the date 1619. And like so much about the history of Black Americans, the role of slavery, it was just going to be erased. And I work at the New York Times. It's hard to think of a bigger platform than that in which to challenge that narrative. And so I was thinking like just a single essay about this, a single story just would not give the weight to what that moment meant. And I decided to set out to prove a thesis I've long said, which is half jokingly, though really seriously, that if you name anything in modern American life, just about anything, I can trace it back to slavery. And that's really what ultimately, it was like, I'm going to pitch a project where through a series of essays, we show things that was in surprising ways, elements of modern society that we can trace back to slavery. And really, I hoped by doing that, if you could do it powerfully, that you could change the lexicon and really force the date 1619 and a reckoning with slavery into the national conscious. That was my big dream. But really, my small dream was just, I wanted to make sure that I did my part in trying to have us deal with this 400-year-old legacy.
Was it a hard sell? I mean, the New York Times is, it's a radical reimagination of our country's founding fable, right? And yes, the Times is not known for radical reporting sometimes. So,
it's not.
Yeah. So was it a hard sell?
People, that's probably one of the most common questions I get is people assume that this would have been very hard to convince the Times to do. And honestly, it wasn't. Now, I will say it's a presumption that makes sense. Let me say that. So it's not surprising that people would assume that it would have been hard to do this, but it really wasn't. And I think a couple of things worked in my favor. One, I had been on book leave and that book leave kept extending. And so I think my editors were so happy I actually came back to work that when I came back and pitched something really big, they were super supportive. I also, though, had by that time really had a track record of pitching big projects and bringing them home. I wasn't a risk. And I also worked, I work with editors who really trust and respect the work that I do. So I didn't even write up a formal pitch. I came back, I had a conversation with my editor about this idea. She was like, I love it. Pitch it at the ideas meeting. I pitched it. And at that same meeting, the editor-in-chief of the magazine said yes. The other thing I'll say is I work for the magazine, as you know, which is distinct from the newsroom. And not as conservative as the newsroom. So I don't know that had I pitched this project to the newsroom, it would have been what it was. But being that it was for the magazine, but we're allowed to have more voice, and it's a magazine, it's a different style of writing. I didn't face obstacles, and in fact, the project got bigger and bigger than even what I pitched originally, and there was nothing that I asked to do that I was turned down on. So luckily in this case, I didn't have to fight the battle. The battles would come after publication.
All right. I want to sort of take it back to the origins of your career.
Yeah.
So, what was most remarkable to me in reading the project was, as you said before, I could see all that you had done before that led up to this, work in a really incredible way. And so I think that the story of how you got to the point where you could create this seminal work is really important. And I think for our audience holds a lot of really interesting lessons on how you can push through and persevere when you're trying to, be your authentic self and do the work that you feel called to do in spaces that are sometimes resistant to that. There are a couple of stories in which I think we both overlap. One, I wanted to talk about something that happened early in your career when we were in Chapel Hill, when there was an effort, frankly, to sabotage the beginning of your career. You want to share a little bit about that?
I started at a twice weekly newspaper called the Chapel Hill News. That was my first full-time journalism job after I graduated. Worked there a couple of months, and I'm actually on my honeymoon. So I graduated and I got married that same year, and I get a call from Casey. And Casey tells me that, so the smaller paper was owned by a larger daily paper. And of course, you would much rather work for a daily newspaper than a weekly because it's a more prominent job and pays more. And she calls and tells me, you called and tell me that my boss, that there was an opportunity, the paper wanted to bring me on, and my boss had tried to sabotage that because she wanted me to stay and work for her. I, of course, then called the Black managing editor there, and I was like, is this true? And I was going to quit because I was so upset that someone would try to sabotage my career. What was amazing to me about that incident was, one, like you said, other people knew, but no one told me. And I was lucky I found out, because if you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known. And my career could have likely been very different. I could have been stuck in this, this minor role at this twice weekly paper for much longer. I might not have gotten called up to the bigger leagues of the paper. And then everything else is a domino effect after that. And I think we don't know, particularly as Black women, how often these things happen in our career, and you don't know that you're losing opportunities that no one ever told you were losing, or why you've lost those opportunities. And it was one of those kind of early lessons early in my career about what allyship, and I don't even mean cross-racial, but allyship with your fellow workers means. You could have been, which I've also seen many times in my career, selfish. I don't want this chick to get this opportunity, right? We see where other people will sabotage you. They won't share information because they don't want you to advance. And that just showed me that all of us have to try to lift each other up and advocate for each other. And throughout my career, especially when I was first starting out, I lost another opportunity. I had interned at a smaller newspaper in North Carolina, and I had met this recruiter from the Oregonian, and he had kind of followed my career. It wasn't much of a career. I was just starting out, and they had this 2-year minority fellowship program, and I applied for it, and I didn't get it. And the recruiter, his name is George Reddy, he's Latino, he calls me and he says, you need to know what your references are going to say about you before you put them as a reference. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And what I found out was the editor I had worked under, I had my internship. I had a great internship. I had great stories. I thought we had a great relationship, that he had told them, I'm not sure about her because she seems really obsessed with writing about race, and I worry that she's too biased. Now, he never raised this concern to me. I asked him to be a reference, and he was like, I would love to be a reference for you. And he tried to sabotage me and had George Reddy not said, told me like, this is what he said about you, and this is why they ultimately didn't hire you for that 2-year fellowship, I would have never known that either. And certainly took him off as a reference after that. So there's these periods in your career where these types of things happen. And luckily, occasionally throughout that, I've had people who have been allies and let me know.
I truly believe that adversity is such a relative thing. What one person may believe is adversity may be true inspiration to another person. And so even now, as we think about all of the different challenges that so many of us experienced this past year during what many would call a triple pandemic between, of course, the health crisis, the social injustice crisis, and the constitutional crisis that we experienced as America. Many folks, of course, had to figure out how to chart their course during that, but part of it is really understanding how do we embrace so much uncertainty. And I think it's exciting on one level because we are all in such uncharted territory, which means, quite frankly, that nothing that we've ever done before will work. So we have permission, and I've seen a number of examples of leaders sort of stepping into those spaces and doing what they feel is best to bring us to the other side of this era.
So to pick up on that theme of she writes too much about race, so you talk about your experience once you got to the Oregonian and some of the challenges that you had there and trying to write, work that you're now famous for.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, a few years, or not even a few years, sometime after I didn't get that 2-year internship, it would have been about 3 years. So I ended up, working at the News and Observer and did really great reporting on school inequalities, school segregation, discipline in the Durham Public Schools. That same recruiter calls me and he's like, we have a job opening here. I've been following your work. I really want you to apply to the Oregonian. Now at that time, as you know, the Oregonian was a paper where if you wanted to learn narrative writing, that was the type of paper that taught you narrative journalism. And I was really interested in that. So I applied, and I don't even know if you remember this, but I crafted my cover letter. I'm pretty sure I had you read it over for me. And I was very clear. I was like, I want to write about racial inequality. And this is my dream as a reporter. This is what I'm interested in. And if that's not, I said it nicer, but if that's not what you're interested in, I'm probably not the right candidate. But here's my clips all about racial inequality. And this is what I want to write about. Because I was so bothered by the fact, that I lost that opportunity because they were worried about me writing about that. And I was like, I'm not interested in going to a place that thinks I'm not going to want to write about that. That's the only reason I became a journalist. So I wrote that cover letter and they hired me. But then I get there and it becomes a problem. She left, she was replaced, moved to another job, and it became a problem that I wanted to write about race and Black people. And I got my stories turned down all of the time. And then eventually I got called into a meeting where I was told, you're writing about Black people too much, and there's concern about your ability to be objective, and we're really worried about that. And I, by that time, had kind of reached my wit's end. It was very hard for me to know that I was pitching good story ideas, stories that were important, stories that my colleagues weren't writing. I didn't understand why you would want to hire a Black person, but not want the Black person to write about the stories that a Black person would bring. Why do you need me if you just want me to write the same stories that all of the other white reporters would write? And so, as you know, I was really thinking about leaving the industry. There were no jobs. A lot of newspapers were laying off. All of my friends had left the industry. They were leaving the industry. All my other journalists of color had been run out. And the only reason I couldn't leave is I literally could not think of what else I would do with my life. I had wanted to be a journalist since I won my first journalism award in high school from the Iowa Press Association. And yet I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And kind of the last straw was when I got sat down for that meeting that I was hurting my own career there. I couldn't even get on the front page of the Oregonian, which is, hard to imagine now. And I printed out every story I had ever written. And I then took every story that had a Black person in it, even if it wasn't about Black people, like if I talked to a Black person. And it ended up being 10% of my stories. And I printed them out and I came in to my editor and I said, look, I am only writing 10% of my stories about Black people, and you're saying that's too much. And I'm starting to feel like racially targeted here. So I'm just letting y'all know I've kept emails, every email you've ever sent me, I've kept that. And I want to know, what do you expect from me? And I need you to tell me, have you had similar conversations with white journalists about how often they write about white people? Because if you haven't, I don't understand what we're doing here. Things did get a little better after that, but I also luckily got hired out of that newsroom for ProPublica, and then was finally able to really do the work I wanted to do.
No matter what profession that you're in as a Black person, have had moments where you feel like you may have been hired for window dressing. And yes, that they claim that they wanted you to do certain work, and then you get there and then they push back against everything they claim they wanted you to do.
Yes.
And so
I often say it's like phenotype, like they want to be able to check a box. They want phenotype diversity, but they don't want diversity of thought, right? So they want to be able to say, look, we have a Black reporter, but they don't want that Black reporter to bring the bulk of their experience. They just want you to fit in with the same way of thinking, types of stories, whatever the job is. So I was not interested in phenotype diversity for phenotype diversity's sake. And I think what I'm sure many people of color watching this can relate to is then you come to this career crossroads. You know what you have to do to be successful in these institutions. You know what is expected of you. And you have to either choose, am I going to do the thing that is going to ensure my advancement the most, or am I going to stay true to who I actually am and why I got into this industry, but also know that that means I might not find the success, right? I may not rise through the organization. And to me, what was more important was being intact, right? Like not losing my sense of respect and dignity and what I wanted to do, but I also was sacrificing for a while my advancement. And I would watch other people advancing and getting these jobs and opportunities. And that was really hard because I knew I had the talent, ambition, the ability, but my unwillingness to compromise over certain issues did hurt me, though in the end it worked out. But as you know, it doesn't for a lot of folks.
So let's fast forward to the 1619 Project. What was your sort of initial goal or expectation for the project? And how did sort of the initial reaction to it compare?
I didn't have any particular expectations because I knew this was a project on slavery and racism and There's a reason I felt the 1619 Project needed to exist. This is not something we really want to deal with. It's not a popular topic, particularly for journalism. So I had a lot of anxiety even about how I had somehow managed to get the Times to commit really an unprecedented amount of resources to this project. And if it published and no one cared, it was going to close doors, not just for me, but for other Black and brown folks coming behind me and pitching ambitious things. So I had a lot of fears, but I didn't have any particular expectations. I just wanted to tell these stories the way I felt they needed to be told, and not try to make them palatable or digestible to the Times' core audience. That I wanted to do a project that I felt did as much justice to the subject as it could. And then when my editor, Lena Silverstein, was like, well, what would be your wildest dream for this project? And I was like, I just want Americans to know the date 1619. Like, if I can just somehow force that into the national lexicon, I will have succeeded. And it seemed like a crazy thing to expect from a work of journalism. But that's what's happened. So the response has been bigger than anything I could have possibly imagined. The day that it came out, as you know, like, it sold out all over the country, and people were like tweeting about, I went to 5 stores and I finally got a copy of it. And folks were waiting in line like for the new Jordans and doing like unboxing videos, and like people were holding 1619 brunches to like commemorate the issue. And people were saying how I got 5 copies and I put them in, the hope chest for my kids because I want them to have a copy of this one day. It was astounding. People, how emotional, particularly Black people, were to like have something like this. And so often would say like, I felt a lot of this, like, but I didn't know, I didn't have the facts to like back up my understanding of the world that I was seeing. By equal measure, the backlash has been unexpected. I expected backlash, of course, because you don't create a project at the New York Times, of all places, arguing that Black people are this nation's true founding fathers, and we should consider 1619 our true founding as opposed to 1776, and that slavery is as foundational as freedom or anything else, and not expect there's going to be pushback. Like, I knew it was an evocative argument. I certainly didn't expect the level of vitriol, and the president issuing executive order. I've now been mentioned in both of Donald Trump's impeachment trials, which is so bizarre. My own state is debating a bill to prohibit the teaching of my project in public schools in Iowa. So that has been crazy, and the amount of right-wing attacks that I have received because of the project, I didn't expect. I didn't expect a year and a half. Yeah. I mean, this is like, it's both the blessing and the curse. Like, the dream is to produce something that, in this society where our attention spans are like this long, and every day we're inundated with thousands of stories and words and images, that you could create something that people are still talking about and arguing about and affected by a year and a half later. But damn, it's a year and a half later that bills are being introduced against the teaching of your work of journalism in schools. It's unsettling.
Maybe we can end on your thoughts on what you think is next for the broader conversation on race in America.
I think we can only go so far in our country on addressing racial injustice if we don't have a common understanding of what happened. And we haven't had a common understanding of how we got here. So you can't really build the necessary policy and coalitions to advance racial justice when we're not operating out of the same understanding. And when I think about in the protests last year, how often you saw the year 1619 invoked, how often you heard people talking about 400 years and this legacy and this ongoing legacy. Joe Biden, during his inaugural, talked about this 400-year legacy, and that we're still living with it. That is what allows us, right, starting to have this common understanding that slavery predates our country, that yes, slavery ended 150 years ago, but the legacy of slavery did not disappear 150 years ago. If we have that understanding, then we can begin to actually pass policies that address that specific legacy. You know that even 10 years ago, the idea of reparations was considered radical, fringe, treated as a joke. It's not anymore, right? It was part of the Democratic primaries. It is being considered in serious conversation, even though it's clearly still very controversial. So it's that type of movement that I hope my work helps to foster, which is, let's not, we can't understand the country we live in based on the history we've been taught. The history we've been taught is the history of a different country. It is not the country that created January 6th. It's not the country that led to George Floyd. It's not the country that leads to the gaping racial disparities that we see now during the pandemic, where Black life expectancy gap between white and Black is the lowest that it's been, or widest that it's been in 30 years. That glorified narrative exceptionality does not get us to this America. We have to have a true understanding of that which this country was built upon if we want to become the America that we believe that we are. And my project is just playing a role in that education. I know you've heard me say this before, but even before the 1619 project, I've said my work is attempting to be the red pill in the matrix, where you take that pill and suddenly you see the entire architecture upon which your society was built. And once you see it, you can't pretend that it doesn't exist anymore. You might not do anything about it. You might ultimately take that blue pill so that you can forget about it. But once you've seen it, then you have to acknowledge that this is all constructed. And you can't deconstruct something if you don't acknowledge that upon which it was built. So that's what I hope that we're seeing right now. But we also know these movements take decades and decades to pay off. And you're not going to see ever in this country overnight change. We probably won't ever see it at all, the change that is necessary. But we have to work towards a world that we might not live to see.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you, Nikole, so much. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for doing you, when it wasn't always easy to do. And for those of us who, have had a, front row seat to the Nikole Show all these years, I really am so very proud of the arc of your career and what you've contributed, and looking forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you for joining us this evening. It was wonderful to share this celebration of Black leadership and history with you all. It was a pleasure to join you as we heard from Nikole Hannah-Jones, our awardees, Corliss Gardner and Jonathan Peck, artist Sam Trump and Leonard Mitchell, as well as the many local civic leaders, social sector leaders, and members of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. A special thank you to the planning committee who brought this event together, and our sponsors for their commitment to supporting the work of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. On behalf of the CAAIP leadership team, we thank you for joining us and look forward to your continued support. Thank you, and have a good evening.